This is homemade bread that I made around my regular work schedule. You're going to see how to make this bread. What I'm going to do first is make what's called a poolish. A poolish is a wet mixture of water and flour and yeast. So I'm putting 1 1/4 cups of flour into my bowl. I'm taking just 1/8 teaspoon of yeast. I have 2/3 cup water, and I am putting it in here. I used a scale until I broke it, and then realized that if you know what it's supposed to look like, you're good. So to weigh it, and the problem is with flour, is the flour, it's going to measure differently. And having it measure differently every single time you bake just makes everything not work. And people will say, oh, I can't bake. Well, maybe you just never saw how it's supposed to look. This is poolish. This is too thick. That's barely poolish. I want runny. So I need more water. The thing about making it the day before is when yeast reproduces, it lets off enzymes. Those enzymes add so much character to the, little more water, and that's the big difference between this is homemade bread and this is store-bought bread. And in my humble opinion, if you want really amazing bread, to get that, it just takes time. So I'm starting with just this little bit. Now what I'm going to do is add a lot more to this tomorrow. But today, on the first day, we are mixing our poolish. That's pretty good. So do you see how that, And when I mix the dough tomorrow, we'll be able to see what the dough should look like too before you leave it to rise. It's falling off my spoon at about that rate. And I'm going to put this in the refrigerator now. And it's going to sit there until after work. The next step is to take the poolish out of the refrigerator and let it set overnight. It's best to leave it set between 10 and 12 hours. But I'm taking it out a little bit early because I'm going to play cards with some friends. It looks pretty much like it did earlier. A couple bubbles there, but it looks pretty much like it did earlier. If you forget to mix the poolish during lunch, you can just mix your poolish in the evening and skip the refrigerator step. It's gonna be okay. Every loaf of bread is unique. Every single loaf of bread is unique. So don't worry. Good morning, I am back. I'm starting a little bit earlier than what I usually start because I'm talking through it and it's going to take me a little longer. And my goal, of course, is to get the bread mixed and get to work before 8. Your basic recipe for bread is flour, water, yeast, and salt. That is your basic recipe for bread. What I also use is malt syrup. Okay, it helps the yeast. It's going to sit in a bowl for 2 hours, and then around 10:15, I'm going to take a break from work. I'll come up, turn the camera back on, we'll shake the bread, and let it rise for a couple more hours before I bake it during lunch. And that's how I can make bread during my normal work day. Let me show you what the poolish looks like. Plastic wrap off. Remember, we put 1/8 teaspoon of yeast in here. Just 1/8 teaspoon. There's a lot of yeast in there now because that 1/8 teaspoon has really grown. First, I'm adding water. I'm putting 1 1/4 cups of water into my bowl. I know some of you bread bakers are shuddering because I'm adding all my water at the same time. I'm going to take my malt syrup. Malt syrup is pretty much impossible to measure. So I'm going to take my knife. I guesstimate about 1/2 teaspoon or so. Alright, that's good. If you can't find malt syrup, don't let that stop you from baking bread. Just skip it. It looks like molasses, but it's not. Don't substitute molasses for it. It's really quite different. Poolish is going in next. that aside. I take my knives, my butter knives, just simple butter knives here, and I kind of chop up the poolish a little bit into smaller pieces. Let's put that on there and we'll mix it a little bit too, just on low. Next I'm going to add more yeast. I'm going to add it right to the bowl. I'm adding a ½ teaspoon of yeast. I already have a lot of yeast in there, and I'm boosting it with another ½ teaspoon of my instant dry yeast. The flour will vary every single time you make it, and we need to go for a certain texture of the dough. I'm going to start with 3½ cups. I know I'm going to end up using 4 or more, but let's start with 1, 2, 3, and ½. Set that aside, pop that down. At this point I add my salt. The recipes I get out of the books, they just have too much salt. I mean, I started going low salt a little while back, and when I buy it from like the fancy chain bakeries, it's that salty. I can just taste the salt, and I'm really not crazy about it. I'd rather have my own bread with just a little less salt. I'm putting in 2 teaspoons of salt. This is too wet, as I totally expected it to be. Let me show you what it looks like right now. When you use the mixers, you do have to flip it over a little bit. So you see, this is not bread dough right now. This is just a mess right now. We're going to turn this mess into bread dough. I'm going to go ahead and throw in just about a whole cup of flour. You know, mixer's starting to work a little bit harder. Let's give it a little kick there. I'm getting close, but I don't think I'm there yet. Just unlock. So you see, this is still way too wet. There's some dry stuff in the bottom of the bowl. I'm gonna scoop that up in there a little bit. Oh yeah. If I go too crazy and add too much flour, then I'll just have to add more water. But I don't think I will have to today. I'm going to be alright. That looks like it's shaping up now. That is still, too wet, but we're getting close. See, I can almost touch it, but this is still too wet. See that? Oh boy, I got a mess now. Throw in some more of this. We'll kick up the speed a little bit. Open this. Let's take a look at this. Oh boy, we're almost there. That looks pretty good. I still see some dry spots down there. Let me pull this out and show it to you. See that? We're looking like dough now, aren't we? I'm going to finish up the last of it here to get the final texture. You could do it all in the mixer, but there's just something about getting your hands in it. You've already seen me touch it a lot. That would probably make a terrible professional baker because I like to get my hands a little bit dirty. You know, if it's just for yourself at home, go ahead, use your hands. Alright, you see the texture of the dough. It's not, I mean, it's just a little bit of flour. It's not sticking to my hands too much. See that? Sticking a little bit. So, a little bit sticky, but not a lot. It's like, folks, we are there. We are there. Then what you have is stringy, chewy bread. And you see as I mix in that flour, you see how can't read in a book to see what this is like. Get the idea. Alright, next we need to put it in a bowl so it can rise for 2-3 hours. Just use a little bit of oil so that it will not stick too much to your bowl as it's rising, and then we need to get it out. Because I'm going to come up around 10:15, basically just for a coffee break. I'm going to be dumping this out of the bowl, I'm going to be shaping it and getting back to work. That's my goal. Shape it, get back to work right around 10:15. Roll it around. There is our dough in the bowl. Let's cover it. Here. I'm not making it airtight. I'm just trying to trap in moisture. I don't want it to dry. I don't want it to like dry and crust over on the top. It is 7:17. I have dough. It's about time for me to get ready for work. The next thing I have to do is get my oven ready. I'm going to turn my oven to 440 degrees. I want it to come on at 11:30 and heat up so that somewhere between noon and 12:30, when I come up to bake the bread, my oven will be hot. And inside the oven, this is my baking stone. And now I can clean up and get to work. It is mid-morning and I am going to shape the bread now. They call this proofing when you set it up to do that final rise in the shape. I'll show you the bread there. So there we go. See, that's the here's some flour. Gotta put some down here. I'm just gonna put a little on the cutting board. I could just use the table, but this table's got these little grooves in it, and it kind of makes a mess. So I'm using a cutting board because I oiled the bowl. It's coming out pretty easily. See that? Not sticking too much. Beautiful. Dough looks a little bit wet. I'll probably be... You want to use right now just enough flour to be neat, okay? Just enough to make it easy to work with. Yeah, dough is a little bit soft, so my final loaves might be a little bit kind of collapsed, but it's still going to taste wonderful. I could add a little more flour to it, but I'm kind of low on time, so I'm not. I'm going to shape it just as it is. This is for 2 loaves. I'm not sure if you were doing the math and counting the number of cups of flour that went into this ultimately, and the amount of salt, but this is for 2 loaves. So I'm going to start by making one nice shape there. When I try to rip my dough in half, it's a disaster. It's never even. It's not even when I cut it, but I get closer to it with this. So I'm going to take my knife, cut it like that. I did that a little bit quickly there, but I'm going to pinch that on the bottom there. If your dough ever gets dry and you're trying to shape it and make it stick together on the bottom, you can take just a little bit of water, add a little bit of water, and you pinch it together, and it just really sticks together really well. The dough, you add water, it gets really sticky really easily, really fast. Pinching this, the idea of shaping the bread here, you want to have a little bit of a tight shape around it. You see I was wrapping it under and I pinched it underneath. That gives it a little bit of tension here, and then as that yeast does some more rising in the next couple hours, it's going to be pushing out on that, but because I created a little bit of tension, it's supposed to keep it a little compressed, or so I read in books. I'm going to take my loaf. You want enough flour that as it rises, it doesn't stick to everything too terribly. Okay. Alright, now I'm going to put towels on top. A little more flour on the top because I don't want it to stick to my towels. It's just a disaster. Dough is so nasty when it dries. It turns to like cement. And if it gets into towels and turns to cement, you've got a ruined towel, which is the example of these that I'm still using. I'm putting this towel, little tea towel. Don't use terry cloth. Get like a linen towel. Terry cloth, it grabs that dough and it's a real mess. These just get a little bit messy, so don't use terry cloth. Alright, I am tucking it in for a couple more hours rest. And of course I already set my oven. Alright, catch you in a couple hours. I'm back. It is lunchtime. I'm sure you want to see what the bread looks like. Woo! Look at that. Isn't that pretty? This is a bread peel. This is the peel that I made. This is just made out of 1/4-inch plywood. Luann it's called. I need a bread peel because I have a stone in the oven. There's a hot stone in the oven that's 440 degrees and I don't want to be sliding the tray in and out. So I want to put the bread on this. I'm going to put some flour on it. I'm going to put the bread on it and then I'll just be able to slide the bread off of this peel onto the hot stone. Lift off the towel. Look at those beautiful loaves. I am now going to not make a mess. I'm going to put on my apron and stand up. Grab some flour. A little bit of flour and smear it around on my bread peel. Now I'm going to carefully lift the bread from my mat onto the bread peel. I don't want to collapse it. Okay. And it comes off, oh, fairly well. Okay. Alright, it collapsed a little bit. It's still going to be good bread. I'm not worried. It's so looking really pretty there. Okay, so there is our bread. Now I'm going to take the razor blade. If you have a very sharp knife, you can just use your sharp knife. And I'm going to make one slice down the middle there, one slice down the middle here. When your bread bakes, it's going to rise, it's going to change shape. When you score it, you're going to be able to tell it where to rise rather than have it be random. If it's random, then a lot of times you get these weird splits in the side and your bread just looks goofy. So it's mostly just aesthetic. Now we want a really good crust. Here's the trick to a good crust. A cheap pie pan. I'm going to put a 1/4 cup of boiling water into the pan and I'm going to stick that in the oven. And what we want is a perfect crust. So if you bake your bread in a totally dry oven, at least this recipe, crust is going to be like a turtle shell. It's going to be almost inedible, really, really hard. Now, if I bake it in a steamy oven that's steamy the entire time, the crust is going to be like leather. We want a perfectly crusty crust. If I put a 1/4 cup of water in this pan, it's going to create steam for the first half of the bake, and then it's going to dry out, and the second half is going to be a dry oven. And by balancing steam and then dry, I'm going to get a marvelous crust. Okay, I got my water boiling before it, so I'm going to measure a 1/4 cup of hot water in my pie pan. Pour that in, and I'm putting this in the bottom of the oven. So I got 2 trays in there. One tray has my stone and the other one. So I want to make sure that it's steamy. So it's going to take a couple seconds for that boiling water to create a lot of steam. Alright, I got some steam going on here. I'm going to open it up. I need a spatula. I take this and I stick the peel right in the oven. Don't worry, your peel's not going to start burning on the stone if it's just for a minute or two. I'm sliding the edge of my loaves onto the stone, and I'm pulling out the peel using the spatula to help push it off. There we go. Close the oven. Putting it on, make sure we're at 440. I want to bake this for 30 minutes. We started it at 12:26, 30 minutes, about halfway through the bake. I am going to move my loaves around a little bit and we'll give you another peek into the oven there. So I set the timer for 30 minutes. It's on, so it's been baking for 7 minutes so far. And let's just open this oven real quickly there. You see it's starting to see how that's rising there. And take another peek at it. We are about 10 minutes into baking now. There's the bread starting to brown. Alright, a couple minutes later, we are about halfway through the bake, so it's time to rotate the loaves. Every oven has hot spots and cooler spots. I have found the hot spot of my oven, and it's in the back corner. So that back corner back there is the hottest spot. You'll even see that as I twist this loaf around. There, spin them around, slap the lid shut. Okay, and I'm about to take it out of the oven. I only got a minute left. Take a peek in there. And I'm going to get this camera off and set it up so you can watch it coming out. Okay, got the camera back on the tripod. Here's our time here, showing you the time again. And you can hear it. 30 minutes, it's done. Because I know my oven, you might have to play with that a little bit and plus or minus and all that, but I know my bread's done. And we'll scoop that out. Set that there. Scoop this out. Set it here. And here is the bread out of the oven. And that is the work-at-home bread recipe. Here it is. You don't want to cut into it for about at least 10 minutes. It's still a little bit early, but I'm going to go ahead and cut it just to show you the bread. Ooh, see that steam? Yeah, you should know what it sounds like too. They talk about this thumping sound, this hollow sound. So that's that sound. And that is a perfect crust. That's a great texture. I mean, look at this. Sorry about that. Hey, thank you for your time. Here's the recipe and the directions. You can simply use your pause button and stop it so you can make sure to get it all written down. I hope you enjoy this recipe. Again, this is Sean, the Work-at-Home Cook. Have a marvelous day. Bye.